You ever think about heaven? I do. A lot, actually. I'm coming to you today from Smithers. I'm actually coming home from Smithers, British Columbia, Canada. A really beautiful place. And I want to talk a little bit about heaven. What's heaven going to be like? I've been up in Smithers for a couple days. I came up to honor the life of my Uncle George. Really, really cool guy, awesome man, and connect with family. There's something about a funeral that makes you think about your own mortality. And I don't know about you, but I find myself thinking a lot about heaven. What heaven's going to be like. I'm coming up here to Smithers and I see the beauty of this place. Not only Smithers, but all of British Columbia, even though I just drove through a bit of it. And I sometimes wonder, is heaven going to be this good here? Now, don't get me wrong, there's so many crappy things about Earth. I think of all the death and disease, and sometimes the people are interesting. But as I go home, and I want to show you some of the beauty of this province, I sometimes really doubt that heaven, as beautiful as it might be, could be better than here. But then I think about my destination today, which is home. Home is where my heart is. Home is where life happens for me, and home is where, home is where the love is in my life. And as I think about home, maybe that's what heaven is going to be like. Maybe it's home. And when you think about home in the English language, now I have parents who grew up in Holland, and so often they say things like, well, I don't know if this word translates, but I wonder if there isn't a more powerful word in the English dictionary than home. When you think of the word in the most purest sense, home is a place of security, of protection. Home is a place of joy. Home is a place of where you're known and where you know others. It's a place of love. And as I think about today, going home, that's where I'm headed. That's where my heart is. You also think of maybe one of the hardest things for us to grasp as people who live in the West or in Canada is when that people's homes aren't good. It's so hard. And when people don't have that security and their homes aren't a safe place, it's almost like a certain blasphemy. It's terrible. In fact, one of the worst words I think in the English dictionary is homeless. And if you don't have a home, that's the worst thing that you could have. It's the worst position in life, not to have a home. Well, when you look in the Bible, there isn't really a lot of words for home. Maybe, I'm not a scholar, but there is a word you see popping up from time to time. And it's the word in the Old Testament, G-A-N, Gan. Gan means garden. And as you read in the book of Genesis, you find that's our first place that human beings are given to live in, is the garden. Right? So Adam and Eve, they get there, and what is it? It's a place of total protection, security, freedom, love, purpose, meaning. I mean, the garden is the most incredible place that God could ever create for his human beings. And then, of course, we all know what happens. Adam and Eve fall, and what happens? They're booted out of the garden. So they become gardenless. And after that, it's really a sad story. But the word garden actually, it pops up in Scripture from time to time. Solomon has an amazing garden. When Jesus is on earth, we find one of Jesus' favorite places, the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where Jesus comes to pray. In fact, it's the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus prays his last. And if you do a little bit of digging a little bit on the word garden, you find that in the first century, in a typical Jewish home, say in Jerusalem or maybe more in an urban area, but even out also in the rural areas, you lived inside and slept inside, but most of your time was spent on the roof And on the roof would be a garden. And the garden is where you grew things like grapes. And this is where you grew your produce. And this is where you grew things. But it's also the places where, if you really grew it well, you could have shade and you would hang out and you would spend so much of your time there. And so the garden really was, and I think if you ever watch like House Hunters or something, you'll see like in England and stuff, they call the backyard the garden. The garden was the place where you kind of let your guard down. The garden is where you met. The garden is where you had meals. The garden was the epicenter of the home. It was the center piece of the home. And so in Jesus' day, people really would have had that sense, or they really would have had that feeling that the garden is also the home. So you also see the garden when Jesus comes back from the dead. Jesus rises, he comes out of the tomb. And where is Jesus? He's in a garden outside the tomb. In fact, Mary thinks he is the chief gardener. And then what happens in the last chapter of the book of the Bible is we find once again a garden, that God is restoring to us a garden. I think if we're trying to find a real idea of what it's going to be like when we cross over, you know, as I think of my Uncle George who's passed away and all my friends and loved ones who've passed away, I think the best idea we can have is that we're going home. And as great as this journey has been of life, and it's amazing, it's not going to compare to the reality of being with Christ, where, as the pastor said yesterday, where our faith will finally become sight, where we will see Jesus, where we will know the Father. It says in John 14 that Jesus says to his disciples, I'm going to go ahead of you, and I'm going to prepare a place for you, because in my Father's house, he has many rooms. So that is the idea of home, right? Now, as I'm driving, I think this journey is beautiful. It is. It's just gorgeous. I'm going to try to show you as many pictures of that as possible of my drive and some other pictures, but it does not compare to home. It just doesn't. It's a great journey. It's beautiful, beautiful place. But I can't wait to get home. Now maybe you're watching this and you're like, I don't know about all this kind of stuff. It seems kind of weird. Like, do you honestly think this journey is it? Don't you think when you look in your heart that there's just something more? There has to be something more to live for? There has to be something more waiting for you? And while I would say yes, of course there is. That's why Jesus came. He came to put eternity in our hearts. He came so that we could finally know what home is really like. Well, I got a long way to go yet today to get home. But I'm hoping that this little devotional might steady your heart a little bit, or give you some hope and give you some peace, and have a great day.
Like the vibe? Please subscribe.